lot of times, especially out of New York where it was cold. It was electric trains out of New York, and we had, it was fair, but we would, at times we had to work with heavy clothing until the car got warmed up. 3 times when I was in New York would start out, and all of a sudden there'd be a spark, and some young fellow would be hitchhiking from New York to Newark, and he would connect with electric. Of course, it would stop the train, and he died from it. But they would hitchhike from New York to Newark or Philadelphia, and I usually was a register clerk on the train, and I made the coffee and things like that. Would have meals. Usually we carried a grip. We got on the trains. We changed into our work clothes, and then so many minutes before we had a signal, like before the New York Holland Tunnel, we'd all change back into our regular clothing. And same way coming Pittsburgh, would start at East Liberty and change into our regular clothing. Everything was tied out, and unload the mail and go home for a day or so. I normally worked 6 days on and 8 days off, but I had a few jobs that were longer running, and I worked 4 and 10 off. But I enjoyed it very much. Come off the trains in 1967. We had a seniority problem getting back into my hometown. Then I was sent on a highway post office. I ran Pittsburgh to Bradford for a period of about 6 months. Then I transferred back into the Pittsburgh post office for 6 months. Then I finally got to Johnstown. When I got to Johnstown, I eventually took various jobs from stamp stock to foreman of the mails, and I was foreman on the machine, multi-sorting machine. And then when I wound up, I was a tour superintendent, and then I retired in the Johnstown post office.
Okay. Don, tell us a little bit, what were the conditions like on your cars?
I can't add too much to what John said, except I thought it was hot sometimes, hot as hell. And it was dusty all the time. But I enjoyed it, I really did. I enjoyed the, like getting the mail up before you got to a certain stop. It was like, what do you call it? I don't know how to phrase it. A challenge. It was a challenge to get the mail up before you got to certain stops, so everybody would get their mail at that stop. That was, I like the challenge part of it. But I subbed most of the time, and one part was when I'd sit down to a Thanksgiving dinner and the phone would ring and I'd have to go out on the train, or any holiday really. My wife would get pretty upset because I subbed for like 9 or 10 years and you were on call to go. I didn't have a regular job. But I worked with John up until the end. He doesn't remember me, but I remember him. Good. And I worked those highway post offices that he did too. I went to Bradford and Sutton, West Virginia.
Well, let's talk a little bit more on the trains. Oh, go ahead.
We used to throw mail off and catch it with a hook.
Yeah.
We always had an expert.
That's okay. Don't worry about it.
We always had an expert on the train that knew exactly where we are. We went along and he'd casually tie up the pouch for that city, throw it off, and catch the new pouch. It was a wonderful experience.
Yeah, talk about that. How did you know when the time was coming, that you had to throw the mail out of the train?
Usually the engineer would signal a couple blasts, and the expert we had, whoever, I'd done it, but only in a rare occasion, he'd know exactly. He'd just casually would tie out the pouch, walk up to the door, throw it off, and catch the new one. It was an amazing experience. At one time, there was 162 trains a day out of Pittsburgh. Local trains, Pittsburgh to Uniontown, Pittsburgh to Latrobe, and I subbed on all those.
That's before my time.
So, Don, were you involved in catching or throwing the mail out?
Yeah, I've done that. Yeah. I don't know if John remembers Dan McGrew.
Oh, yeah, Dan.
He's the one that taught me that.
Okay.
Yeah. And you could do it more on timing and stuff, and even the turn of the train sometimes it would tell you when you were coming to a stop to throw up the arm and throw the bag off.
Did you ever have to do it at night?
Sometimes the bags went underneath the train and they got tore up, you know. Yeah, it's been done at night.
Yeah. Was it more difficult to do it at night?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And did the engineer still give you that blast of the whistle?
I don't remember the blast. John remembers that, but I don't remember the blast.
We used to have a local train. 19 was one. Stopped at every stop, like New Florence, Seward. And they run mostly in the day. And that's when they put the bags in. Of course, I remember one time a young fella threw off a box of chicks.
I never saw
that was a disaster.
You'll have to tell us the story, John.
Well, what happened was he was a sub, and he was helping the fellow that was catching the mail, and these chicks were for like Latrobe or Greensburg, and he didn't realize that the train wasn't going to stop, so the chicks went off. And that was probably the end of most of them.
Yes. Did you carry a lot of live animals in your parcel post bags, or such as those chicks?
No, not many live animals, no. Not that I remember.
No, there was bees and chicks mostly,
bees,
and they were
yeah.
most at the end of the car, away from most of the letter sorters and stuff.
You never had a package of bees come open in the car?
Yes, I've had experience that.
It's been a-
And they go for the queen bee and gather everything. They'll all go back to her.
Tell us a little bit about preparing the day for the car, getting the car ready, or dressing the car, as the clerks call it. What would
Okay.
you do on a regular day to get ready?
Well, each one had their own position. Would hang the racks with the canvas and the paper section, and there'd be a special fellow that was his regular job to put labels in all the pouches, and the regular poucher would see that mail got off at certain stops and would help unload. There was always a storage car. People would go back and help unload in the bigger cities like Philadelphia and Harrisburg. You know,
What was the worst job to have in a car?
I think it was the paper job, John.
I think that would be. Paper job required a lot of dexterity. You had to move a lot of heavy sacks and
Yeah.
dump them and throw the papers off and
You're
so.
more like a jackass.
What was the best job to have?
I think it
job.
was. I think it was register clerk. I had a wonderful job. My job was required to have a special place, a stool, special bins. I was in one train wreck in Lewistown in the 50s or 60s. We hit a tanker car, and it split open, and we all wound up in the hospital. Some of the fellows had a tracheotomy, and several never returned to work. But I was off several weeks in the hospital for my throat was burnt from the chlorine.
I remember that.
Yeah.
They called all the subs
At
out for that.
Lewistown,
Yeah.
engineer died.
All the regulars were all off, it seemed. All
Yeah.
the subs were working the trains.
Yeah.
What was that like, Don, having a car full of nothing but subs?
Oh, they were experienced. They knew what they were doing. When you were a sub, you worked just about every job on the train, so. I worked them all, so.
So, John, as a registry clerk, did you find that you were the target of the inspectors when
Yes.
they would come to do their thing?
Yes, we had to be very careful when we got to New York, especially because as you went upstairs in the New York post office, there was always a crew waiting to get their registers. Sometimes there would be a whole nutting truck, we call them, of registers. Well, they would be so anxious they'd start pulling them, and we had to have the numbers checked first, guaranteed. You know, everything had to be on paper, and we had to make sure they didn't pull them away before they were recorded. That took extra time, though. Most everybody was having breakfast while I was still upstairs. And we stayed in the Hotel Martinique in New York. Very, very nice place. We had our own floor. And we stayed at the Pennsylvania Hotel when it first started, but then they eventually changed all that area over toward the Madison Square Garden. And the Martinique, I stayed up there many years. It was a dormitory type of thing. And you could you couldn't eat there, but you could rest and sleep and shower and so on.
I've been hearing some horror stories actually about some of the places that clerks had to stay. What were some of the worst places that you ended up staying?
The worst place I ever stayed was called Mrs. Zettelmoyer's. It was in Philadelphia, and it was just a boarding house. And at times I had to run that ran just Pittsburgh to Philadelphia. And for a while I stayed at the YMCA, but then we finally got in with Mrs. Zettelmoyer. And it was nice, but the blankets were made out of old pillows and things. It was just heavy blankets, and we sort of didn't appreciate that, but we stayed there.
Don, what about you?
Well, this part was going down to Sutton, West Virginia on the highway bus. And all that was there was a hardware store. And this elderly woman rented her second floor out for us. Mm-hmm. And I went up to get ready for bed, and I sat down on the chair. The chair fell apart. I got ready for bed, and I pulled the blind down, and the whole blind came down. I said, oh, what the hell did I get myself into? But I got through it. They only charged like $2 for the room, I think it was then.
Did you know Frankie Christofko?
Oh, yeah.
He ran down there.
I know all them guys, too.
All right, very good.
In fact, the one guy became a big shot in Pittsburgh. Andy, Italian guy.
I don't remember the name.
Oh, you'd know if I come up with it. What's that?
Oh, I was just going to ask, tell me a little bit about your time, the schedule. It was so unusual compared to other jobs. You would have several days on and several days off. Mm-hmm. How did that play with family?
Well, it was a little tough on family, but I moonlighted for 12 years on another job with insurance claims on my week off. So my wife, she had a big job handling the children, because I would always try to get on a run where Monday through Wednesday, I'd go home Wednesday and be home the 2 times during the week before I finished up for my 8 days.
And Don?
Well, my wife didn't appreciate it, that's for sure. Especially when you sat down for a holiday dinner and the phone rang, but we got through it.
That was harder than having you gone for 4 or 5 days at a
Yeah, she didn't care for that either. I like that. Being a sub, sometimes the regulars would be off for, say, 3 or 4 months, and the sub would take her job. And the best one I had was you ran 4 days and 3 off, and you did that for 3 weeks, then you would get 10 days off. So I like that too. But I did side jobs on the side, like John said. I helped roofers out and stuff. Mm-hmm. Made extra money.
My one of the things I did wrong was one year I was a sub clerk, and it was a holiday, and I got my telegram, and I expected to be in Pittsburgh before the holiday, and I go to Pittsburgh all the way from Johnstown. We used to have a railroad pass that was any good east of St. Louis. And there sits this fellow on the cover. And I said, I'm out for you. He said, that's next trip. So my family never forgot it, and he goes to work 3 days ahead of time.
John had it rougher because he had to come into Pittsburgh from Johnstown to catch a train. Mm-hmm. And when he got off in Pittsburgh, he had to go back to Johnstown and then come back and catch the train again. That was tough on them guys.
Only one time in the whole time I deadheaded home, and I looked out the window and I saw the horseshoe curve and I realized I had passed Johnstown. I had to go to I had to go to Altoona and come all the way back home.
Some guys came from Altoona into Pittsburgh.
Oh
didn't
yeah, we had
Yeah.
it from Mount Union, Huntington, everywhere. Yeah.
they? Yeah.
So what was, of the lines that you ran, what was the hardest line? Would it have been a local line where you had all of the catches and the throws, or was it a fast line where you had to get everything done?
I think the New York pitch was my hardest line. I did run down through the local lines, Uniontown and Brownsville and so on, but I think most of my hardest work involved was on the pits.
Why was that?
Well, there just was more involved. Sometimes we had one car, sometimes we had 3 mail cars, and you know it was involved back and forth. On the other lines, there was just one small mail car, maybe a 30-foot car.
And Don, any particular line that was easier or harder?
I never liked going out when they called it the wash and check out of Pittsburgh to Chicago. Those guys had no personality at all. They treated you like crap. Maybe because you were coming from another line or something, but they didn't appreciate you.
You spent so much time as a sub. What was a good thing about being a sub?
Sometimes you were off a good while.
Other times you worked maybe 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah,
And
sometimes.
when people were making $5,000 a year, you were making 10 because you put the extra time in as a sub.
Exactly. That is good and bad.
Let's talk about the schemes and what you had to know. You had to know all the towns along your route. You had to know the streets of the cities. How was that? How hard was it to learn all of that?
It was difficult. You had to spend a lot of time. In my job, several times, I've studied New York City, the entire city, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh. At one time, I was on what they call a short period, the Cleveland Pits, ran to Cleveland. And believe it or not, they put Cleveland on there for me. So it took a lot of time. We had to memorize all those cars, and then you got a test in Pittsburgh. You had to make over 90%, and before you were considered qualified.
And how often were you tested?
Oh, it depended on the state. Like Pennsylvania had three divisions. You put one division up at a time. Usually, I think every 6 months or certain jobs once a year. It depended.
And how well did you do on your tests? How well did you do on your tests?
I always did pretty good, but I put a lot of time in. But I was always ready to hold my job.
Spent a lot of time studying?
Yes. Because we not only had to study Pennsylvania or the states, you had to study what they called a PL&R book, was the Postal Laws and Regulations. And you also you carried a .38 all the time, pistol. And you had, once a year, you had to go to Pittsburgh and practice with waxed bullets. Of course, where you practiced in waxed bullets, there was holes all. But
See, that's the first time I've heard that you practiced with wax bullets.
Wax bullets in Pittsburgh, yeah. We all had to carry a .38, a Schultzer.
Right.
Schultzer.
How about Don? How about you and the tests and the schemes?
I didn't have much trouble because I didn't do too many cities. I did mostly states, and I didn't have much difficulty. I think the cities were harder.
Easier to know the cities in a state than the
It was
streets in
harder
a city?
to study the cities in the states,
Yeah,
I think.
yeah. We had some real experts. Bob Stitt, I don't even remember him.
I remember him
He
and
had
his brother.
Philadelphia, and he knew Philadelphia to the alleys, and he was great.
So how often were you tested, Don?
I think it was, I couldn't remember, for 6 months or a year.
I think it was 6 months, a year on some of them, yeah.
And how did you do
Yeah.
on your tests?
I didn't have any problems at all. Like I said, I studied states mostly, and I didn't have any problems.
Did you study a lot, or
I didn't have much
Didn't have to.
problem with it.
because it was a lot easier, do you think?
Yeah, I was younger too, I guess.
How about your firearms tests? And
Yeah.
did you use wax bullets as well when you?
I don't remember the wax bullets, but maybe it was. I don't remember.
And how were you both as firearms? Were you?
You
fairly
carried it
decent?
with you all the time.
Yeah.
Were you good marksmen on the
Fair.
test?
Fair.
You had to qualify, so you had
Yeah.
to be good, I guess.
They took them all away from us when we retired and melted them down.
So Don, we didn't hear about you. Did you ever have any run-ins with inspectors? We were talking about, I know usually registry mail was one of their main concerns, but I know they also looked for clerks that had their badges, their guns, and
No, I never had any problems with it.
didn't ever. That was good.
We had several instances where, not mentioning any names, one of our foremen was tapping the religious mail that went to Ohio, and inspectors came, and of course he lost his job and pension over it, things like that.
Were either of you ever involved in a robbery?
No, not I.
No, that's good. Lucky.
Yeah,
So nobody ever had to use their weapon or had one drawn on them.
No.
Very fortunate.
we had foolish people like Dale Wakefield. I don't even remember. We would stop sometime for some reason, and there'd be a cornfield out in the back. And Dale Wakefield would get out of the car, sneak along, and he'd fire his gun in the air.
I don't remember that.
Over the cornfield, and the conductor would come up and say, "What's going on here?" And he was that type of a jokester.
Yeah, he was, but I don't remember him doing that.
I know there was a lot of pranking and joking around going on
Oh.
with the guys in the cars. What were some of the ones you remember?
Oh gosh, one I remember well was a fella had this fake vomit, and he would bring it to another car, put it there, and throw water on it, and then call somebody to come over to the other car, and they would think something happened, but it was really a piece of plastic. Stuff like that. They were always pulling jokes.
I remember one time we had a new sub on the train, and the guys got together and they find this bucket or something. They give it to the guy, and they said, "Go over to the other car there and ask him for a bucket of steam." He went over. He didn't know any better. He said, "They sent me over here to get a bucket of steam."
We had the same Dale Wakefield that
Yeah, he was
always
funny.
had a crow caller. And he one day found a wild duck somebody was sending through the mail, with a purple ring, and it was dead, of course. But he opens the door and throws it into the other car and then blows on this crow call, and just stirred everybody up.
Yeah, he was a funny guy.
Anybody who made just a real stupid mistake that on any of the cars you were on, or like maybe a new guy or a sub who just didn't quite know what he was doing?
Like the bucket of steam.
Kind of like, yes.
I remember a fellow by the name of John Hunt. One time he had bought a bottle of wine and put it up in the closet. And of course, during the course of the trip, it had spilled on one of the fellow's sports coats, and they never forgot that.
What was it like working on the train? I know there's standing. You stood up all the time. There was very, very crowded.
Yeah,
What was it like moving around, getting the job done?
it wasn't bad once you got onto it. You could move around pretty easy.
How many guys were usually in a car with you?
On the 60-foot car, probably 6 to 8 men on. For maybe more than that. 6 in the cases
Yeah, it was
and
more than that.
letter cases and pouching and register clerk and paper. Maybe 10 or 12.
And how noisy would it get on a car?
It would get pretty noisy, especially in the summertime. They would have the doors open, and it would get fairly noisy.
Never any problems with the doors open with the mail flying about?
No, not that I recall. We always had to be ready, though, with everything piled up at the big cities, Philadelphia, Newark, whatever, to put off for the people.
What are some of your favorite memories about working on the cars?
My favorite, some of my favorite memories were eating together. We used to have a break to have our meals and different little things that I remember. I had a real nice friend. He was Jewish, and he'd always call me down and say, "Hey, John, come down and have a chicken sandwich with me," and it was ham. Things like that, I remembered.
Yeah.
It did get crowded a little bit, John, from going from one end of the car to the other. When you had to go through the racks, that's where it got cramped.
And what would you be doing going through one from the other?
Well, sometimes the guys from the letter end would have to go back to help the guy in the paper and unload the mail. And it got there wasn't much space between the racks that you worked.
So what were some of your favorite memories, Don, of being on the cars?
Some of them you just can't tell them on a tape, right, John?
Well, what can you share with us?
I remember one time it was funny when say you were in Pittsburgh and a guy was bringing a registered mail up to the car. You had to read off the numbers, the numbers of each register to the clerk that was taking them because he had a sign for them, and then he would check your numbers. Well, we had a clerk. There was the registered clerk, and the guy's calling off the numbers. He's going 1, 6, 8, and the guy accepting the mail said, you making fun of me? They were both stuttering. I thought that was comical as hell. I'll never forget that.
What was the worst run or the worst memory you might have of being on the car?
I think the worst experience I had was when I was in a train wreck.
Yeah, that was pretty bad. I remember that train wreck.
Other than that, I don't remember anything real serious.
Train wreck was pretty enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of them four-wheel would make you work in a cold. That was something. I hated that.
Talk about
you
that.
You didn't have any heat in the car. It was cold in there.
And you, sometimes a power failure, and you would have to use candles. I got a couple of candles in there that they had on the trains. And you would have to work by those candle lights till the power came back on.
How often did that happen?
Not too often.
Not too often enough that you had the candles, perhaps.
Right.
Yeah. What were some of just as you were going on the trains and passing along? Did you ever get the idea that the people who were out there, the postmasters or what have you, really understood what you guys were doing, and get that when you would talk to people and say, "I'm an RPO clerk," did you get the idea that they understood everything that was behind that?
I don't believe so. I don't think most of them understood. They knew their mail was coming from the train station, but I don't think most of them knew what happened to get it there. You know, when we were working, if you mailed a letter anywhere in the East, it was delivered the next day in Chicago. And so I don't know whether they fully understood that.
What about pay? When you were first considering what job to take, and you picked this one, was pay a factor?
It was for me. I had just come out of the Navy, and I was working in the U.S. Steel Company for a short period, and they were having all kinds of strikes and coal shortage and so on. So I took the exam and got it right away, and the pay was steady and much better.
Don, how about you? Was that a factor?
You know, we got paid for every 6.5 hours we worked, we got paid for 8. The regulars work that way too? Yeah,
Yes.
because they work 6
Yes.
on and 8 off. Yeah, we got paid 8 hours for every 6.5 we worked.
And we got expense money for making the trip for hotel stay and
Plus,
food.
we were a level higher than the clerks that were working inside.
How did that
So the
compare
pay
to other
was
jobs?
better.
Was pay better than other jobs out there as well, or I know it was higher
No,
than
they
just a
were all
regular
the
clerk.
same.
Yeah.
Everybody made the same except for the foreman.
No, I'm sorry, of other jobs out there in the world at the time when you're first coming back from as you
I-
say, from being discharged or
I think-
starting out. Were there jobs that available that were, you think,
No, I
not making
think,
as much money?
no, I think the other jobs, especially if you were in business for yourself, were better. And of course, the steel making in our area was better. But the one thing about our job was steady. You knew you were going to be there till you finished working.
Now let's talk about benefits and retirements. We haven't touched on that with other clerks. What kind of benefits and retirements
Mine-
available did you have as an appeal clerk?
Mine was very fine because we had a good pension. When I retired, if you had 40 years service in, you got 80% of your pay. I retired with 38 years service. Made a good pension. Since then, my pension has passed what I earned when I was a tour superintendent there.
What about your benefits? Did you have health care?
Oh yes,
So
Good
when you were
health
in
care.
your rec, they took care of that.
right. Good health care, yeah.
Yeah. Don, how about you? Good benefits?
My
and-
dad said, if you're not going to go to college, Don, you better get a government job, and he was right.
There you go.
That tells you in a nutshell.
So you're both glad you made the choice?
I am.
I am too.
I am. It was a wonderful experience, and it's been good for myself and my family.
Same here.
Well, we're getting close to ending here to get ready for the next group, so I'd like to ask just one more question for both of you. If you have one thing you'd like to talk about for the service that you think the public just doesn't understand or know about, or you want them to know, what would you say?
I don't know. I would say the postal transportation service at the time was very good for our country. Since then, of course, we've been automated, but I believe the postal transportation service at one time was the best thing our country had.
Don?
For the mail service, I think John's right.
Okay, well, I would like to thank both of you very,
Okay,
very much
Nancy, thank you very
for
much.
doing this.